Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. I'm your host, Sunny Vanderstar. Today's topic is evolution, a vicious cycle of survival. And it will be presented by our fabulous NatHab expedition leader, Conan Dumenil. Conan, thank you so much for being here today. It's always fun to see your smile, and I just want to remind everyone that it's like middle of the night where you are, and you're still here with a bright smile and lots of cool information to share with us. So let's go ahead and dive in before you fall asleep.
Hey, Zadi, thank you for that introduction and welcome to all our viewers. Thank you for joining today. Yes, it is 1:30 in the night where I am, but got a nice strong cup of coffee to keep me awake. And well, I actually can't help it. I mean, can't help smiling when I talk about science. And I mean, the whole purpose for me doing this series of webinars is to take you beyond that safari or the wildlife watching experience and delve a little bit into ecology and the science behind what we see out there in nature, out there in the field. And that's been the inspiration behind the series of webinars that I've been doing. And today I want to talk to you about coevolution. Now, may seem like a very academic term, but there's sort of reason behind why I chose this topic, and I'll reveal it to you as we go along. Now, as long as I remember, I've always been interested in spotting creatures and observing their behavior out in the wild. And I think one important aspect about this is also looking at how they interact with each other, and that's been a constant throughout my extremely lucky or fortunate, I must say, that I found the right job that allows me to do these things. And for the past 20 years, I've been guiding uh, trips around India, Nepal, and Bhutan, and some very fantastic trips with NatHab in since 2015 to some really fabulous places. Now, while you're on safari or for on nature trips for that matter, we have great opportunities to observe wildlife, and I think rather the a very significant aspect of going out on these trips is the chance to interact with peers, with fellow travelers, with local guides at your lodges on trips, and also with your expedition leaders. And for me, as an EL guiding, since 2015 now with NatHab, one of the things that I've really enjoyed are the conversations you have with people. And we meet people from all over, different walks of life, different career paths, and it's a great sort of interaction and a great exchange of knowledge that happens. And as you know, all of us ELs love to talk. We like to talk about our work and what we do and what we see out there. And like I said, that's been the inspiration behind this. So what I'm doing here is picking up little conversations that we've had, possibly with some of you on a safari, where you have questions like ranging from what is that, or why is that animal doing this, or what happens if this comes here, and what happens in this season, if this does not reach that place, then what happens, and all of these questions that come in. Permits a larger conversation. And a lot of it is actually tied back to ecology and the interaction of species that goes around. And that's what I intend to do during this webinar and a series of webinars that I do henceforth. So today, let's talk about coevolution. Now, to put it in academic terms, in definitive terms, coevolution occurs when two or more species reciprocally affect each other's evolution through the process of natural selection. Now, natural selection in itself is a process which populations of all living organisms adapt and change. Now, it's very, I mean, often we all make the mistakes of looking at confusing natural selection with adaptation. Now, to put it very simply, adaptation refers to the mechanism in which an organism changes itself to the environment, and natural selection is a larger picture of things. So over periods of time, when we talk about coevolution as well, we talk about these traits becoming hereditary and passing down in genes itself. Now, studying the genetics in evolution itself is a whole different can of worms, and it's topic, I think, for several webinars, and I must say I'm not really qualified to talk about that. But I'd like to share with you going forward today is what we've seen in the field, what we've interpreted, and how we can juxtapose that with some of these academic terms, with some of the science that we have, in fact, probably learned in high school or back there. So bringing that back into memory, bringing that back into life is what we will do here. Now, speaking of life, when we look at organisms from a biological perspective, life is a collection of organisms and which are all interrelated. The anachronism often used is the web of life, where we talk about all species being interconnected with each other, interacting with each other, which is the basis of the field of ecology, the study of ecology, is that what it looks like. So no species can exist by itself. They all interact with each other in some way or the other, sometimes mutually beneficial, sometimes not so much. And so again, to bring that into the perspective of coevolution, we look at when one species, when two species interact with each other and they reciprocally affect each other's evolutionary journey or evolution. And that's what we talk about in terms of coevolution. So we're talking about a giraffe and an acacia tree, for instance. They both have an interaction, and they both are in a stage of evolution, and they will affect each other's journey or each other's pathway to that goal of that cycle. We've seen coevolution, I mean, as a concept, when you're studying it in biology, we see that it plays a very key role in shaping the biodiversity on Earth. And again, to understand it is necessarily to understand it in from an area of a species fitness, from both within the species and also within its interaction with other species. Now, a large amount of research has focused on fitness consequences. When I say fitness, I talk about an animal's or an organism's ability to not just adapt, survive, but also thrive. So, in this context, that's what we call animal fitness. And focusing on their fitness, there are consequences that are resultant of their interactions with other species. Now, it could be a mutual beneficial interaction. It could also be an antagonistic interaction between the species. And to put it in plain speak, think of it as a constant competition between species to kind of survive or to thrive or do better. And so, like if we want to put it in human terms, a little bit of healthy competition. Think of your sports tournaments. Think about, academic things in classrooms. We're constantly pushing each other, not just to survive, but also to do better at some time. And when we talk about yes, so coevolution does influence biodiversity a lot, and this is true because we've seen animals sort of split into different, into various adaptations and have various very niches which they occupy, and that increases the diversity, so to speak, and also talking about general level of fitnesses and your ability to survive. Now, when we talk about coevolution, it is hard not to mention Charles Darwin and his theory here. Now, if any of you have traveled on NatHab's trips to the Galapagos, I'm sure you would have heard the story of his when he sailed on the HMS Beagle and spent a considerable amount of time in the Galapagos. And this is where, that place was the inspiration for his Origin of Species and the follow-up books. Now, it came, the most important study that Darwin did, and this was carried on by several researchers later as well, but he was studying finches, where he observed that even though there is just one singular species of finch, which is found on the South American mainland, they found that the same finch had different features, so to speak, on different islands. So each island influenced a particular feature that was developed in the finches, and all of this was studied through the shape and structure of the bill. Um, so just by looking at the bills, we've understood, and these are not just adaptations, but adaptations that have been there long enough, so much so that the traits of these were passed down genetically to give them an advantage and an ability to survive in a very, very specific environment. So the Galapagos is a great place if you're studying coevolution, if you're looking at ways organisms have adapted to very, very specific environment. And, again, putting it in plain speak, today we know this as what is known, what we call natural selection. So this entire thing, to kind of consolidate and put it in, it's a constantly happening process. And we've seen, in fact, there is a book called The Bill of the Finch, which talks about these two researchers who are studying the finches, and they talk about evolution happening not just on a generational basis, but on an hourly basis. And it's a fantastic book if you ever to get your hands on one. So putting that aside, let's now get into what kinds of or the types of coevolution we see, what can we relate to, and what does all of this mean? Excuse me. Now, to split it up into, excuse me, three basic parts. Now, I said earlier that coevolution can be of two kinds. You have a mutual relationship, and then you also have an antagonistic relationship. So when we look at mutualism, we look at that and in its whole, and then when we look at sort of the more antagonistic relationship, we will divide it up into two things for the sake of this presentation, to understand it from a predator-prey relationship, and also to understand it from a host-parasite relationship. So looking at mutualism, it's basically a symbiotic relationship where both species benefit from each other. Now, the common thing that comes to mind is we know are pollinators. Now, there are two kinds. Again, for the purpose of this webinar, we're looking at two kinds of pollinators, some that are borne by insects and some that are done by plants. And again, this is a fascinating rabbit hole which you can go down yourself if you're just studying orchids and their pollinators. That itself is, a mind-blowing subject, where we look at how individual plants have adapted, who have evolved rather, to attract certain kinds of pollinators. And we see these pollinators having very, very specific mechanisms to not just fertilize, but also benefit from these plants through nectar and so on. So a very common example, something that we're all familiar of, are hummingbirds. And in the old world, we have sunbirds that form the same niche. So in Africa and Asia, we have the sunbirds, which are very similar to hummingbirds, small, rapid flying, long down curved beaks that feed exclusively on, almost exclusively on the nectar of plants. And so they have these beaks that are adapted specifically to get reach into the base of the plant, where they're able to, and this long curved tongue, I must add, where they're able to access the nectar, which is at the base of the flower. And as we know, flowers come in various shapes and sizes, and so these beaks, different species have different sets of beaks. Now, if you're looking at an example from India, where I can give you, we have the Lotan sunbird, which has a very, very long down curved beak. And we have the purple sunbird, which seems to favor flowers that are between the red to yellow spectrum. So all of these are sort of co-evolutionary mechanisms that that specify two very specific organisms and their interaction with each other. Bees, we know, are excellent pollinators, probably the most important of the lot, and we owe a lot of our livelihood to bees, thanks to the fruit and vegetables and everything that we eat. They carry around and they have these pollen sacs on the hind legs, which as they fly from flower to flower, feeding off the nectar, they also carry the pollen, which when they go, then go to the from the male plant to the female plant, and then that's what fertilizes the flower as well. So this is a mutually beneficial relationship that all of us are very, very familiar about. But I also, and if you know me and listen to my talks, I like to go a little off track or off beat as well, and look at some examples which sometimes they exist right under our nose and we don't know. And this one thing which I like to share is the relationship between the fig and the fig wasp. Now there are close to about 800 species of ficuses around the world. We know them as large trees, we know them as shrubs. Some of them have them as vines as well, which are very, very popular ornamental plants. But all ficuses have, or rather, all ficuses are signified by the fruit they have. Now, let me tell you that this is actually not a fruit, but it's a composite sort of organ of the plant that has that holds the female flowers and the pollen inside. So what we're looking at is a composite structure which has got the flower and the fleshy outer body, which constitutes a fruit. Now, if you got the flowers on the inside in sort of a sealed sphere, how does this get to pollinate? Now, you'll be interested to know that out of the 800 odd species of ficus around the world, there are about as many species of fig wasps that inhabit these ficus trees. Now, the fig wasp is very specific to each species. So you might have the strangler fig will have its own fig wasp. The sacred fig will have its own fig wasp, and so on and so forth. So each species of wasp inhabits only a particular species of figs. Now, let's get into the life cycle of this wasp. What's it doing on the inside of the fig and what role does it play? Now, the life cycle, if we start from, let's start from a mature female. So what happens is the mature female, if you can see the smaller picture there on the top right, she has this long ovipositor, which helps deposit eggs in between this little knotted structure inside the plant. Now, an adult, a mature female, will enter the fig through a little opening in the fig, a naturally occurring opening, and she'll wade in there. And as she goes in there, she actually loses her wings. She might lose some bits of an antenna as well, because it's a tight crawl in there. And once the female is in there, she then deposits the fertilized eggs that are in that she's carrying into the wasp. Now, what happens is then that the eggs will hatch. There are males and females that are born from there, and as the males and often after she lays her eggs, the female often dies. Now, there are other species of wasp that also are other kinds of fig wasps that are non-pollinators that are responsible for the cleanup job within. So they will prey on the remains of that and clean up this fig. And then the male, after hatching, will then break open, will sort of chew his way through, making this tunnel in the wasp, creating an opening for the other females who are inside, who have already mated and gravid, and then will come out and then emerge and go to another plant to pollinate. So it's a fantastic cycle that goes in, that happens inside the fig. And yes, do think of this story next time you open up a fig and look at what's in there. And I guarantee you'll find at least 1 or 2 wasps in there. But we've been eating them for centuries. In fact, Greek scholars millennia ago first observed this, and of course, as we've studied them through the years, we know uh, the entire life cycle of it. But yes, every single species of fig has its own fig wasp, and and the cycle continues. So once she leaves, she goes to another nest, and then propagates the entire cycle again. Now, another way, another form of mutualism that we're looking at, which doesn't involve pollination, is the relationship between the acacia plant and the acacia ant. Now, there are a few species of acacia in South America, and one common species is the bullhorn acacia. And what happens is that when the leaves uh, emerge, they let off a particular scent. Now, acacias, and I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. Now, acacias in themselves are fascinating plants. I've spoken about them when we spoke about, sort of chemical signals and how their interactions with giraffes in Africa. And now I'm talking about an interaction with an ant. Sorry, the acacias itself have various defense mechanisms. Ranging from noxious spines to toxins that repel other insects. And in the case of the bullhorn acacia, what it does is that it creates a space for this particular ant to actually nest. So if you look at so they have these 2 spikes that come out, and there's a picture of a broken bullhorn. So what happens is that, so once the leaves emit this particular scent trail, it attracts the queen of the acacia ant, and then she'll go in there and she'll nibble through the thorn at the base of the thorn, making a little opening and starting the initial nest, where she'll lay about 15 to 20 eggs in there for the first time, siring the first generation of workers that come. And as the colony grows, more and more of these thorns get inhabited, and once the colony reaches a few hundred individuals, the ants then start acting as gardeners. Now, when we say gardeners, yes, they do a lot of cleanup. They also do protection to the plant. Now, these ants are actually very, very aggressive. They are arboreal ants most of the time, but they also will extend to the forest floor too. But when they're on the plant, they will make sure that the plant is free of any other insects, because they go around attacking everything from crickets to stinging, goats that walk past. Anything that would come near the plant, these ants would very, very aggressively defend. Now, what that does for the plant is that it protects the plant from other parasites, whereas the plant has got its own little, cleanup crew that happens. And not only it's the plant, but the ants also take care of the forest floor around, sort of the turf just around one particular plant as well. Now, what the plant gives back to the ant is shade and a nest. So it is a dwelling place for the ant, and the ant performs the duty of security guard. Now, there is another interesting parasite that also comes on this plant as well, which the ants seem to tolerate, and these are scale insects. Now, scale insects, of course, produce honeydew, which the ants love to eat. So they keep them in manageable numbers while feasting off not just the sugars and the amino acids that the plant produce, but also the honeydew that these scaly insects work. So there's like 3 organisms going through a very, very interesting relationship all in one place there. So the next thing that we like to look at is a more antagonistic relationship here. And this is something that all of us are very, very familiar with, and that's the relationship between predator and prey. Now, I must confess that the initial title was A Vicious Cycle of Survival, but I changed it in the first thing because to encompass a more positive feel. But this, when we look at the predator and prey relationship, it indeed is a vicious cycle. Now, there are many ways in which prey evolve or have to protect themselves against predators. Camouflage is something sort of the go-to for many species, whether we're looking at the horned toads that have this, not just the color camouflage, but also textural camouflage, where we see all these spikes across the body to mimic grains of sand or little pebbles in the sand, and also how it flattens its body out to blend into the little rises and falls and little dips in very sandy soil. And that also performs a thermoregulation function for this reptile as well. And I think some of the best camouflages are in the insect world. If you look at leaf insects, moths, stick insects, I mean, the list can go on. They're just masters at camouflage and what they adapt. And camouflage is a very, very important tool, because what it does is, well, very, very simple. If you can't be seen, you can't be eaten. So we're looking at that. We're looking at a species of, we're looking at a collection of organisms that have developed in some way the ability to understand what a predator is looking for, and then adapt its not just behavior, but also its physiology to counter what the predator is looking for. Now, when we look at this, now we as humans, we're also predators. We are probably gifted with some of the best range of vision, and we can see things in plain color. But think of it from the perspective of predators that can't see through the entire spectrum. We know cats can't see a lot of the colors in the spectrums, so do dogs, and so on. So when we're looking at, I mean, our mind doesn't even comprehend what colors or what their the imagery they're getting would be. And you take that across to snakes, which are some of the best predators on the planet, and we see them how they evolved, not relying just on color, but also heat-seeking abilities. We look at snakes that have modified the pupils of their eyes to give them better vision and better accuracy when they strike at prey. And so there's this whole sort of arms race that goes on in the natural world between the two constantly evolving organisms, whether it's through competition or predator prey or whatever relationship they have. So you have something that develops a certain set of physiology, and then you have another species that develops the countermeasure to this, and it's just a fascinating subject. Outside of camouflage, there is also mimicry, which we see, and I think butterflies are the best exponent of this. Here we have pictures of the monarch butterfly and the viceroy, and we see this color pattern in butterflies from across the world, actually. And we know, like, the monarchs, as you would know, is if you've been on the monarch trip to Mexico, or if you have monarchs in your backyard doing their annual migration from North to South America. Now, in the insect world, or rather on the insect menu, they are not the go-to item in the buffet. They're very, very unpleasant to taste, so I've heard. I can't say this from personal experience, but they are toxic to a lot of creatures. So many birds, many other predators don't feed off monarchs. So, and what it means for other species, and here we're looking at interrelated species of the same genus or the same sort of class of animals, that they develop patterns to mimic something that will be noxious or something that they know is danger. Now, you think about caterpillars, and my last webinar, we spoke about communication, and we spoke about how caterpillars have evolved certain color patterns, and some of them even look like a snake's eye or a snake's tongue coming out. And it's fascinating how you think this sort of lower organism in the whole scheme of things, is able to develop advanced methods to sort of combat or in its struggle for survival. So mimicry is something that is a function that works very well in the natural world, and many species, especially insects, we see them adapt this to confuse them or to copy the species of others, with therefore allowing them protection. Now we spoke about counter adaptations, and I think a great example is between these two creatures here, again both found in in North America and the Northwest. I had a chance a few years ago to see both of these species in the same patch, and little did I know later on when I was researching that they have a very interesting relationship as well. Now, rough skin newts are very, again, toxic, and that's again a defense mechanism to keep them safe. And their toxins are secreted through the skin, so it could be absorbed. I mean, it is absorbed from creatures touching them or trying to eat them, and this is a very, very potent toxin. Now, while that keeps them safe from a lot of other species, it doesn't keep them safe from the common garter snake or the western garter snake. Now, garter snakes have developed special proteins in their saliva. I mean, they're not venomous snakes. I mean, very harmless. You can pick them up in your hand. I did, but they have this special protein in their entire system, in the metabolic system, that not only allows them to eat or well rather catch the newts, but also digest them without any problem as well. And for those of you who've eaten the wrong berry will know, sometimes toxins are not, and they're not bad. I think the worst toxins can also be the ones that you think are harmless, but then really gives you a bad stomach. They're mild and they don't really poison the system, but can really cause problems in your digestive system. And that's where these snakes are fantastic. They can not only eat them, but also digest them proper without any trouble. And again, speaking of arms races, we look at this, and here again, where studies have shown with snakes that they can adapt their saliva, their venom in certain places as well, in certain species as well, based on their particular prey they're feeding on. Now, a study for the Russell's vipers across the subcontinent, and I know a group of people studying them in southern India right now, and they found that there's a large variation in the molecular pattern of the same species, the same Russell's viper, from say the northern part of India to the southern part of India or to the east or the west, and they see there's a molecular difference in the structure of the venom, and this again is because they use venom to immobilize, kill, and digest the prey, and depending on what prey and what they're feeding, the structure of the venom or the composition of the venom has changed over time, and that's a constant evolving process in itself. Now, moving on to the other relationship, we look at the host and parasite relationship. Now, again, those of you in Northern America, Northern Europe, and also now considering that we've just passed the season, mistletoe is a very, very common parasite that we're talking that we're all familiar with, and it lives on a host tree, and that's what parasites need. They need that host. And again, when we look at a relationship between these two, and especially when you talk about plants, it's actually mutations that happened in the species, and as this is constant cycle or this constant one-upmanship that happens between them. And I think a great example to give is the strangler fig. Now, many ficus species have this tendency to grow on a host plant, and I think the best exponent of this is the strangler fig. Now, if you travel to anywhere in Southeast Asia, India, Nepal, Sri Lanka, you will see a lot of strangler figs inhabiting a forest. Now, I remember several years ago, I was watching a documentary by Sir Richard Attenborough, and one of the BBC documentaries, and he spoke about the strangler fig being probably the most important tree in the forest because of the amount of biodiversity it supports. Now, these trees, how they start off is birds eat the figs after the wasps are done with it, though, for sure. And then when they sit on a branch, they perch on a branch, similar to the mistletoe, they poop out the fertilized seed, right, or seeds in this case. And so the strangler fig actually starts its life sort of in a little crook of a branch where a bird has sat. And then it starts sending its shoots upwards and then starts sending its roots downwards. Now, over a period of time, these roots actually form a cage for the host plant. And as they harden and thicken, they slowly suffocate the host plant and deprive it of all its nutrients and deprive the plant of growing and reaching the high canopy and slowly killing the plant. Now, there is this trade-off that happens between, especially when we see in plants, that you want to live off the host, but you don't want to kill your host off too quickly, because then that would be detrimental for your own survival. So like a strangler fig, like if you look at this inset picture on the left, it's a good 35 to 40 years in this case before the host plant actually dies. By then, the strangler fig is the more dominant plant. It's got a structure of its own and it can hold its own. And then often when you see, especially if you've been on safari in central India or in Kaziranga, you'll know that you'll see these often cages of plants with a hollow inside, and it's a beautiful pattern. But there's empty tree inside, and all you left is the strangler fig and its little sort of interlocking cage with the host plant dead. And that's the story of the plant's survival. Now, there is a theory in this, and I only recently found this out, and I found it fascinating. It's called the red queen hypothesis. Now, as we know, both the host and the parasite plant have to keep on evolving. Well, host and parasite have to keep on evolving to keep up with each other. Like we spoke about the garter snake and the rough-skinned newt. Now, there is a theory that says that sexual reproduction helps this process by continuously creating new combinations of genes. Now, parasitism can favor the sexual reproduction in the host, sort of seen as a healthy competition, but it's also seen that a lot of genes are passed more efficiently through reproduction, through sexual reproduction, as opposed to asexual reproduction. So there is this running sort of this race that goes on, much like the race we know in the Alice in Wonderland stories, where it takes a lot of running you can do to stay in one place. So you've got these constant evolving processes between the host and parasite competing with each other, but at the end of the day, no one actually has an edge over each other, and you're still stuck in the same place. Now, when I was looking at reading up on this and looking at how sexual reproduction can actually, why is it favored as a better form of gene transmission for certain things. Incidentally, a friend of mine had actually shared a link on Facebook for a completely different article. And when I put the two and two together, it made actually a lot more sense. And so there was this article recently published in Cell Host and Microbe, the science journal. And it suggests that, long before, the birth of a baby, there is an ingenious tactic that helps the developing, helps humans develop and have, not just humans but other mammals also have shown this, to have a particular edge, and that's a particular phenomenon in the placenta. Now, the placenta, what it does, there are certain cells that we know it is a protective body, keeping all the amniotic fluid, keeping your nutrition, nourishment, everything in there. But between between this embryonic connection that happens between the offspring and the mother, there is a sort of, on a molecular level, there's a whole different thing happening, and there's a particular trick that the placenta plays to keep to keep its precious cargo safe. And what it does is it kind of feigns an illness in that little sort of micro world. And what that does, it sends signals to the body, to the mother's body, to the mother's immune system to keep that system up and running. So what it does, it keeps, uh, as we know, when our bodies get attacked by a virus, our immune system kicks in, it goes into overdrive, and those with overactive immune systems result in allergies, and that's a different conversation in itself. But we've got the competing bodies between the viral cells and the antibodies that go on. So, and often with other things, so some of these antiviruses also slip past our immune systems, and that's when we get sick. Now, in the human fetus and a lot of mammalian fetuses, with the placenta, what it does, it sends a trick signal to the whole immune system. And what it does is, because sometimes the bodies can be, and this is where so wondrous, where once you learn about it, without causing an overreaction, there's somehow maintained at a very, very equilibrium level, that it keeps this thing in a constant running, it keeps the immune system in a constant running stage without overreacting or underreacting, therefore keeping the fetus healthy and fine. So, and then the fetus, the developing fetus, also then develops certain immunities based on this. And while we know that viruses do destroy cells, somehow or the other, the signals that the placenta sends out seems to break all these rules. So it keeps everything at a thing. So how your immune system drops after an attack, somehow it doesn't seem to happen. And there's just this fantastic sort of little micro world that happens around this, if you look at it from a more molecular level. So while it's not really a host-parasite relationship, pun intended, between the mother and the fetus, it is a completely different relationship, and with the placenta playing a very, very key role in keeping up the defenses, the defense system up and running. And it's sort of a what I like to call immune trickery that happens here. Now, going back to more conventional relationships, one thing that, again, most of you will be familiar with is in North America, is that plants also have their own defenses. Now, it's easy to imagine an animal adapting to camouflage or doing mimicry and all that, but when you talk about defenses, plants are not far behind too. Now, most of Rocky Mountains across, we see squirrels and crossbills are two important predators for the lodgepole pine seeds that happen there. So, they feed off the seeds, therefore are considered predators for the plant. Now, there are certain areas geographically that red squirrels seem to dominate, and there are certain areas where you have more crossbills, and in certain places they overlap, and in some places they exist completely separate. So one of the adaptations that we've seen here is that cones in crossbill habitat seem to be fewer seeds. Cones in squirrel habitat seem to have fewer seeds and thicker scales, whereas in cones, when you study a geographical variation areas where they have crossbills, they have more lighter but have thinner scales as well. So the thicker scales were adapted to prevent the squirrels from reaching the cones, and of course, where you didn't have the red squirrel predation, the pines were allowed to have thinner scales to protect. And while I'm just interested to see, because we have pine species across the world, and there are squirrels across the world. I'd be interested to see if there are more studies on other species of pines and the defenses against certain things. So again, we're looking at this one plant that, again, one species, even though it's across a geographical variation, it's developed two completely different strategies to deal with two very different predators altogether. Now, another form of this sort of antagonistic relationship is what we call a brood parasite. Now, most of you are familiar with cuckoos. You know, cuckoos don't build their own nest. There are, in fact, several species of birds in the cuckoolidae family, or in the that don't build their nest in that order. Cuckoos, species here in India that do that, and you also have cowbirds as well, which do the same thing. Now, what it does is, now we all know it lays its eggs in another nest, but then how does it get past uh, the host without giving itself away? Now, when you look at a picture like this is a reed warbler feeding a cuckoo, common cuckoo. Now, the warbler, fully adult warbler, probably the parent of that clutch, is 3 times smaller than, or 4 times smaller than the cuckoo. So what's going on in these brains here? I mean, in the brains of these species here, what's going on? What's computing inside? Um, while we don't know what adults what's going on there, scientists have postulated that it could be just a very dominant paternal or maternal instinct kicking in, that it still feeds the baby, that it's not their own. But there was an interesting research that was done on eggs. Now, when you look at the nest of eggs, um, all of these are speckly eggs. You've got the warbler, and then you've got the cowbird, which is laid its eggs, even though they're larger, but they're sort of same pattern. Now, think about what I said earlier about birds not, or a certain organism not seeing across the entire color spectrum. So patterns are a way to trick. Um, Size maybe. So this is all based on, so when you think of it in a sense that the parasite is laying an egg that it knows has to be similar to the host egg, which means there is a differentiation, or there's an awareness of a particular differentiation between the two eggs. So the parasite is aware that this is what an egg looks like, and the host is going to distinguish between these two, and then that promotes a competing awareness, which says, this is what is going to happen in sort of over evolution, and this is what happens. So excuse me. So we're looking at, again, species, and I'm talking about the level of awareness or the depth of awareness that happens. And this is not, again, something that can happen overnight, but over millennia and over years, that there's this constantly developing strategy which they use to survive. And here again, for me, the question I ask is, what level of awareness are we, when we sort of juxtapose that to the essence of our being. Where are we as humans? We consider ourselves excuse me, we consider ourselves as sentient beings and more conscious, and higher up on the food, um, higher up on the apex of evolution, or where we are. But when we're looking at several other species that also exhibit very high levels of awareness, and are able to adapt to certain conditions, and are able to and not just adapt immediately, but evolve over time to successfully promote their survival. Now, speaking of humans, the humans do have an influence or an impact on coevolution, and this is where, uh, I mean, I think, a lot of people say that humans might be the world's greatest evolutionary force, in the sense that the impacts that we've had, there are good and bad. I mean, for time immemorial, we have valued you know plant material that happens. I mean, we think, again, my mind goes back to Christmas, where the three wise men brought frankincense and myrrh. And why am I talking about Christmas and coevolution? Okay, so here's the story. So frankincense is the sap of boswellia trees that are found across Eastern Africa, the Middle East, and India as well. And the tree sap itself is a reaction to a particular virus or a particular organism that infects the tree. So a tree produces tree sap, and tree sap that we're all familiar with is frankincense, turpentine, latex. All of these have very, very important human um, uh, attachments to them, human utility to them. And but these, in fact, are products of coevolution. So when a wasp attacks a tree or a nest in the tree bark, the tree sends out, like our antibiotics, the tree sends out substances, excuse me, which forms into tree sap, and then we've actually had great utility from this. Now, looking at that, but that aside, we've had far-reaching, consequences or influences on the evolution of other organisms as well. I mean, you think about things like hunting, harvesting, fishing, agriculture. All of these have affected the relationship, or have affected our relationship and interactions with other organisms, and have affected their own nature of survival. We talk about eradication of diseases, is where, again, that's another co-evolutionary struggle where, we there are viruses, there are organisms that are detrimental to human survival, and we have developed the wherewithal to combat those particular viruses, to eradicate those viruses as well. And on the flip side of that, you have areas where our impact, due to all those human functions that I've said, can play a important factor in habitat loss or in habitat change, which then affects the survival of other creatures. Now, in the whole scheme of things, I mean, we always talk, and that's such an important part of the journeys you do with NatHab as well, is we talk about conservation and what our impacts are on the whole thing, and why we do what we do. And I think what, understanding this, or once you have a deeper understanding that that makes that conversation about conservation being more nuanced, and that there is, yes, it may be beneficial also, this particular type of habitat restoration or this type of conservation method that we're doing for this species may be beneficial for one but need not be beneficial for the other. And then that's where, when you understand the ecology and these little facets of ecology such as coevolution and so on, it makes for that much more nuanced conversation, or understanding, when we talk about the preservation of species on the whole. And I'd like to conclude here by saying that these studies and conversations that we have are basically intended for a broader or more detailed sort of rallying point for where we can have future discussions about how human influences shape evolution, and how evolution then influences species trait, and then biodiversity, ecosystems, and eventually us as well. So it is a cycle. It is a cycle that requires a certain understanding and a certain curiosity to understand what happens within then, and because it affects us all at the end. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to what could be a very, very dry subject, but it's something I enjoy looking at or thinking about in my free time. And just, it's been a pleasure to share this with you. I'd like to turn it back over to you, Sunny, and hear from our audience if they have any questions or comments even. Thank you.
Conan, thank you so much. Not a dry subject at all. You make it so fascinating, and I appreciate you sort of sparking our curiosity about things that we don't think about on the daily. Before we start the Q&A, I want to remind everyone that they can submit questions via the questions field in the control panel. Let's start with this one. This may actually stimulate a few other questions. You speak as if evolution is an active process, not just the result of survival of the fittest. Do scientists believe that an animal can influence the genes it passes on? Or I'll add, is there any study about epigenetics or much known about epigenetics in animals?
Okay, so I think the jury is still out, at least from my level of awareness, from what I've looked about and read about the subject. There always seems to be different school of thoughts in where it comes to evolution. And I think when some have even attributed to a more Eastern philosophy connection, where it's not considered understanding evolution um, in an old traditional sense. Always, I mean, I understood it from a linear perspective, where it says you started at an organism starts at one point and then progresses and ends at another point. But that's where the difference between Eastern and Western philosophy, and Eastern philosophy seems to be more based in nature, where it speaks about evolution as a cycle, where it's a constant process. There's no beginning, there's no end, and it could be drastic, it could be very, very subtle as well. Now, as and when we are studying, and each individual species in a particular geographical location can have a completely different cycle from something in a different location. And for me, again, I'd like to go back to the example of Brussels vipers, for instance. Now, this is a very, very common species of snake found across India. And while on the surface everything may look the same, but when you get onto a molecular level, you've seen that there's been a process of evolution going in. You've got these snakes that the only difference between these snakes is that the molecular pattern of their venom. So does that mean that they're different species? Does it mean the same species but different variations? We don't know. These are all questions that are being thrown up. It's like, it's like individual human beings, when we look at our consciousness, from childhood to adulthood, is that an evolutionary process? Is it, how we change our thinking from a more survival based to a more self-actualization based when we are, in our 60s and, can afford to go and travel the world and see trips? That's a different thing. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have a clear answer, to be very, very honest. I think that the constant process, kind of appeals to me more than a more linear understanding of it. And again, it can be something as subtle as just looking at the things under the microscope and just seeing just a diagrammatic difference between species. The second part, there was a second part of the question, Sunny, where you spoke about, did you
I
say
just
epidemiology or,
I no, I
sorry?
just threw out the term epigenetics. We talk
Okay.
about how we are born with genes, but more thought is being put into, or more curiosity is being thrown at this idea that our genes turn on in different ways depending on our environment or perhaps consciousness.
Yes. Yes. That is true. Again, it is a example I like to show here. I mean, I'm throwing here. See, it is proven that genes can carry on even parts of behavior as well. And I think as in how genetics, as a deeper we get into the subject, the more fascinating it is. Another example which I like to throw here is there was a study done a couple of decades ago on the response of primates to snakes. Now, they took a bunch of newborn rhesus macaques, which a constant, animal for a lot of studies, which have not been in the wild, which have not responded, or which have not had any sort of interaction. And when researchers or when scientists showed them pictures or flipped through pictures of snakes or different animals, they always found that these rhesus macaques responded adversely or responded out of fear and hostility to a snake in a striking position. So say you got a picture of a cobra with its hood up and this newborn or just born um, animal, primate, showing this. So this talks that, so this means, I mean, or at least it's proven that fear from something that you may not have been exposed to directly or personally, and something that you may not have even learned from your parents or your peers, because these were newborns. So the only other explanation for this is that there are certain traits that can be passed through genes as well. I mean, we know there is social learning, there is a lot of conditioning that happens, but this as we grow. But then I think that's a great example to show that there is some transmission of something that happens through the genes. So therefore, primates evolved to develop a fear mechanism of, say, certain snakes, because and that for purely for the form of defense. So I mean, if that answers any questions. Yeah.
It answers some questions, but it brings up a lot more. And our viewers are so good at bringing up great questions. And I just want to add before we close that one of our viewers is requesting perhaps we look deeper into plant parasites and the impact on the ecosystem, specifically systems with human removal of parasitic plant, example kudzu in South America and the East. So something to think about for your future
Yes.
webinars. And I just want to let you know too, there were some echoes in the chat saying not a dry subject at all. Really enjoyed it. It was fascinating. So thanks again for presenting this material to us today. I'm going to turn it back to you for closing comments.
All right. Thank you, Sunny, and really thank you to all. I like to pick the obscure and talk about it. And as when you travel on a lot of trips, there are sometimes where you gotta kill the silence by just picking something random and sharing yours, and I love doing this. So I thank you all for your support. I will look into more subjects, and thank you for those suggestions. I'll keep pulling the obscure out and try and make it as lively for you as much as possible. Thank you for joining us, and hope you had a lovely holiday, and best wishes for the start of the year as we progress, and good luck to all of you, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Conan, and Happy New Year to you. I want to thank everybody who tuned in today. Please join us again next week for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, we'll conclude the webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.